Okay, so today I will be talking about a poem that I've already analyzed on this channel once. It's the poem called 同诸公登慈恩寺塔, climbing the Pagoda of Ci'en Temple with various gentlemen. And I already talked about this poem in the video called Great Books of China series number 8. And it's really one of my favorite poems of Du Fu. And today I'll mostly be talking about the language and vocabulary, of course, which is what the Du Fu Explained series is about. But this is really a poem that I think stands out for its quality in the early work of Du Fu. Well, at least it appears so to me, and that may reflect certain prejudices on my part concerning what a great poet actually is and what great poetry is supposed to be and do. And in that video I just mentioned, I actually talk a little bit about that. So if you're interested, you can go back there. But sort of just to summarize, my general sense of what it means to be a great poet is that the really great poets, they have a more comprehensive intelligence than others. And I don't mean that they have high IQ than everybody else, even though it's hard to imagine that a low IQ person could ever be a good poet or a great one. But by intelligence, I mean understanding, insight. The great poets are people with an exceptional power of understanding, which means an exceptional power of perceiving. They see more than we do, and that is the most basic reason why we are never finished with them. What's the reason that we still keep on reading Du Fu 1,200, 1,300 years later? Because we're always catching up. Being a great poet is being a great poet as opposed to a merely good one. It's much more than just masterful expression and rhetoric. They are somehow gifted with the capacity to see deeper into the very movement of life. And they've inside themselves, I think of it that they have inside of themselves this light that's been burning almost since the dawn of existence. And this gives them the power to see all things from the standpoint of the absolute. And in a way, this whole series is my catching up with Du Fu. And I do it because I want to learn to see like he does. And this is a perpetual challenge to anyone that's ambitious enough to try it. And I welcome you on board that journey together with me. And this poem is especially interesting for someone that has my view on poetry in general. And it's unusual because it's both an example of this integrated and absolute poetic view on things that he has, and it's also miraculously a kind of symbolic description of what this kind of poetry and this kind of visionary seeing in itself is like. And I'll try to point that out to you when we go through the words of this poem. So just let's talk a little bit about the historical context here. 同诸公, the various gentlemen here. This story here is quite interesting. So this is in 752, and it's the autumn. And at the time, 5 people were present at the situation. So it's Du Fu, and it's Cen Shen and Gao Shi, and also 2 other people called Xue Ju and Guangxi. And Cen Shen and Gao Shi are both minor poets of the Tang Dynasty, you might say. They don't belong to the very upper rung, but they are important, in the literary history of this period. And both Cen Shen and Gao Shi, they were sort of military men. And especially Cen Shen, he is very famous for his military poems, and he's a very realistic sort of poet, and he writes a lot about the actual experiences of the front of the military matters and so on. And the occasion here is that they all climbed this pagoda together, and they wrote poems about it. And the funny thing is that we have all of the poems by all these 5 people except one. So I think it's the one by Xue Ju that they don't have. And in my stupendous edition of Du Fu's poems, the poems by Cen Shen and Gao Shi and Guangxi are all included, so we can compare. And it's so obvious also just by comparison that Du Fu is just his own world of poetic quality and breadth of vision. Breadth of vision. None of the other 3 poems can compare with Du Fu's. And this tower, what is this tower? The Pagoda of the Ci'en Temple. This is a temple that was built in the Tang Dynasty by the Emperor Gao Shi when he was the crown prince still, and it was in honor of his deceased mother. And the tower was built somewhat later by a very famous person in Chinese history, the famous Buddhist traveler Xuanzang. And it was built to house the scripture and the translation department that he sort of founded for the translation and distribution of Buddhist doctrine into the Chinese Empire. And the type of architecture is Indian inspired. So it's a stupa made of earth and brick, and it's still extant. We still have this. It's in Xi'an, and nowadays it's usually called Ta, and it has like 7 floors or so, and it's in Xi'an. You can go and see it. It's a little bit like the Leaning Tower in Pisa. It leans a little bit to the one side. It's ancient, and it is still there if you want to go there and imagine sort of where Dufu would have been at this point. So let's talk about the actual words. 高标跨苍穹，烈风无始休. So 高标, this is the pagoda. It's high crest is Owen's translation. Yes, it's crest. Biao can be crest, but it's also, something that marks out something, a marker. So it's a landmark, a high landmark, because it's so much higher than the other buildings around, which is of course not the case anymore. And qua, strides up. Yeah, sit astride is what it means. Its original meaning. But I think, here it's the intention is a more general meaning. Roughly, surpass. And Cangqiong is heaven. Cang, gray, yes. Perhaps dark blue. Liefeng, strong winds. Never stop, cease. Yeah, Xiu. 自非旷世怀，登兹翻百忧. The moods of a free and easy man. 旷世怀. So 旷世 is here translated as free and easy man. There's a wonderful poem that is quoted in my edition by Bao Zhao, the 5th century poet, and it says, 小人自龌龊，安知旷世怀. Roughly, sort of, the petty fellow can never know the bosom of a great man. So 旷世 is a great man. It's the opposite of a 小人, the free and easy man. And such a man, trembling, would not tremble at mere heights. But Dufu is not such a man. When he climbs, the 100 cares that he has are multiplied. Fan means multiply. And we will see that these 100 cares that Dufu has, it's quite specific, and he will tell us in the poem what they are. And they are brought into focus here for Dufu by the very height of the tower. 方知相较力，足可追名搜. Here we have vocab that we really have to delve into. The doctrine of images. 相较, this is Buddhism. It's Buddhism, but this is a term that has a very specific meaning that's quite interesting. The idea is that after a time after the death of a real Buddha, the true presence and example of perfected human character is lost. And the Buddha, of course, at this point he had been dead for over 1,000 years. And the true presence, his true presence is lost, and it's being replaced with an image of his virtue. And this is the necessary form of the teaching in a sort of degenerate stage. But it's still not too bad. We have the images of his virtue still, and I don't know where we are now, another 1,000 years later, perhaps in an even worse place. But this is 相较. It's the idea of Buddhism, the religion of Buddhism and the teaching of Buddhism as the traces of a perfected being on earth after a time has passed. So, but more generally, it's just a term for the Buddhist religion. And my edition also notices that this is a name also, the 相较, this term is also a name for the erecting of Buddhist temples, towers, and statues by various Chinese rulers. I mean, the actual building of them. So Du Fu here seems to say that the height of the tower is a testimony to the spiritual strength of its Buddhist builders, and it's associated immediately for him with a heightened state of awareness, because the doctrine of images can lead one to pursue investigation of the invisible. It's a sharpening of his sense of impending doom, which we will see. And in investigation of the invisible, that's what the translation refers here to these two words, Ming So. It's not a bad translation, actually. Investigation of the invisible. It's these generally lofty and far-reaching thoughts of a profundity that you can't really put into words. It's a high fantasy, basically. We go on. 仰穿龙舍窟，是出知称忧. So this is a description of their climb up the stairs of the tower. It's metaphorically compared to a dragon or a serpent's hole, and 支撑 beams and struts, so it's like the internal supporting structures of the tower. And he really brings out in this couplet that it's dark on the inside of the tower and there's brightness on the outside. Because now, in the next couplet, we have a section that describes everything that they see, first on heaven and then on earth. But this section is extremely symbolic. It's unrealistic. Both the things on heaven and on earth. And here in the first 4 lines of this section, they are in heaven. And earth appears distant and it appears, because it's distant, it appears in a way more distinctly, because they are on the height. So let's read this here. 七星在北户，河汉生西流，西河边白日，少好行清秋. This is so wonderful. So 七星is the 7 stars. You see the 7 stars of the Big Dipper. And 河汉 is the Milky Way. Yeah, it's strange actually that the Milky Way doesn't really seem to have a standard name in Chinese. Yin He is the most common, I think. It's called Yin He Xi in modern Chinese, at least. But it's also called like Tian He, Xin Han, Yun Han, Tian Han, Yin Han, all of these combinations. And it's in this line here, it says its sound flows towards the west. Yeah, it's well known that astronomical objects appear to move westward. So this is more, all of this is more of a sort of general description of what heaven is like. It's not what Du Fu sees right now, because from what I can tell, it's actually daytime in this situation that they're in. Because if they would be able to see these things, they wouldn't be able to see things on earth in the next 4 lines, if they would be able to see that, they wouldn't be able to see the things in heaven. So it's not a realistic description here. The remarkable word here in this line is sheng, of course. It's an interesting technique that, a river has sound when it flows towards the west, and the Milky Way is likened to a river, and thus it also has sound. So this is kind of a fun poetic technique. Then we go here. Xi He, whip the bright sun along. Xi He is the charioteer of the sun. It's like in Greek mythology, Helios. But the difference in Chinese mythology is that Xi He is a woman. It's a female deity, the deity of the sun charioteer. And therefore she lashes the sun, or she whips the sun on its way. And then we have Shao Hao, who is the god of autumn. But there's also ancient writings that mention him as an early emperor, as a son of the Yellow Emperor. So these are both gods. And then we go, and Du Fu turns his eye towards the earth, and here we get all the cares, the various cares that he talked about in the beginning, the Bai You. 青山忽破碎，精卫不可求。浮世但一气，焉能辨黄州? So Qin's hills, the Qin Shan, is like the hills of the general region that they're in, and the mountains look small from the height. Of course, if this is supposed to be realistic, it's a complete exaggeration, because, this is 7 floors up or something, and you don't get so far that, the mountains look like small little broken pieces. But, if it's a description of visionary heights, the poetic heights that Du Fu has ascended to here, then this is accurate. The earth is a small thing for a poet at the height of vision. And at this height, the mountains look like, they don't look like a big, huge, imposing thing. They look like 破碎 little fragments at his feet. And 精卫不可求. This is interesting. I talked about this in the other lecture about this poem. These are, Jing and Wei are 2 rivers that flow from the west to the east in the area around Chang'an. And one of them is muddy. I think the Jing is muddy and the Wei is clear. So they could not be found. And this you can take as a sort of metaphor for that, from this height now, when he looks down at the empire seems to be in such a state that, the clear waters and the muddy waters cannot be separated. Good cannot be separated from bad. The right way can no longer be distinguished. Everything is a single vapor. Fu shi, looking down. Dan, only yi qi, one mist. Nothing is clear. And you cannot make out the royal domain. Huangzhou, of course, is the imperial capital. How could I make out the royal domain? And then, after this, Du Fu, he launches into a lament of sorts, which is at first sight not really related to the things that they've just seen, but it's suggested by the actual historical circumstances. And we can compare here with the other 2 poems by Cen Shen and by Gao Shi, and they all mention the graves of the Han emperors. Wuling, in Cen Shen it says, 五陵北原上，万古青蒙蒙. And in Gao Shi it says, 千里和苍苍，五陵欲相望. So 五陵 are the 5 tombs of 5 great Han Dynasty emperors. So this image is suggested to all of the poets that have gathered here on the temple. So either mentally or even physically, the tombs of these emperors are in their sight. And Du Fu, he takes this hint and he summons forth, a mighty image of a crumbling empire that has lost its direction, which is what follows. 回首教于舜，苍梧云正头. Here the whole couplet refers to the emperor Shun, of course, one of the great examples of virtue, one of the heroes of the Chinese mythology. 回首, he's still at the heights, but now he turns back to earth from the heights, and he cries out to Shun, Yu Shun. Yu Shun is the tribal name of Shun. Yu is said to have been one tribe which Shun was the head of. And Shun, he is said to have died in Cangwu, this place, when he was on an expedition to the south. And he was also buried there. And it's said to have been a place in present-day Hunan. So this is, as I said, again, it's completely unrealistic. It's only in Du Fu's mind's eye that he can see the clouds over Cangwu. It's impossible, The clouds hang gloomy over Cangwu. There is no trace of a sage emperor like Emperor Shun. 西在瑶池影，日宴昆仑秋. 西在, here he cries out, 瑶池影, the drinking at Alabaster Pool. 瑶池 is the abode of the Queen Mother of the West, the Xi Wangmu. So now we're in mythology again, like we had the mythological references of the things in heaven. And in a mythological sense, the Yao Chi, the abode of the Queen Mother of the West, it's a paradisical existence, beyond earth. And yin, the drinking at Alabaster Pool, this is a literary reference to the meeting of King Mu of Zhou with her, because there's this old legend that one of the early kings of the Zhou dynasty went on a long trip towards the the west, and he reached the Kunlun Mountains, also mythical mountains, though there are actual mountains nowadays that are called Kunlun Shan, and he met the Queen Mother of the West. So, and the Yao Chi Yin, here it's the idea is that the actual emperor at this stage, he had left responsibility for the empire. Xuanzong was no longer present with the daily affairs of the empire. He feasted with his concubines all day, so he was in this la-la land, drinking at Alabaster Pool all day, while the sun grew late over Kunlun Hill. It's an image filled of doom and the tragedy of an unawakened existence on the part of the emperor. 黄虎去不息，哀鸣何所投？君看隋阳雁，各有道良谋。 This is the 4 final lines of the poem, and here it's another image, and that which builds further on this sense of corruption and impending doom. 黄虎, the brown swan, yes, the yellow swan. Yellow swans don't exist probably, so the translation is better with brown, of course. Birds, have their various associations. So the swan here is a noble bird who is remarkable for intelligence and integrity, of course, and he has nowhere to lodge. Where will it lodge? 哀鸣何所投? It has nowhere to lodge. While we have these other birds, 君看随阳雁, geese that follow the sunlight. There's a lot of birds that follow the sunlight. Migratory birds follow the sun, as if by instinct, mechanically, and never alone, always like in packs. And some birds are, exactly like this. They are birds of the sun. They're always controlled by the light. So the implication here is that some people will always flock to power, no matter how corrupt the power is. They make plans for their own rise, 道良谋, and they will always survive and sort of find their way even in a corrupt world. So these 4 last lines is the ancient distinction between the Junzi, the brown swan, and the Xiaoren, the little people, the little migratory birds. And this is the final lines. He pushes the vision he has back towards the earthly and the political situation, and he says that there is no place for the abilities of the Junzi in the whole empire, but these Xiaoren, these migratory birds, the geese that follow the sunlight, they always manage to snatch some gain for themselves. Gain and grain, literally here. And they're oblivious to the fate of society. So this is what Du Fu ends up with when he climbs the pagoda of a temple. This is what a little bit of sightseeing does to him, and you see here what an extraordinary man he is. This is the extraordinary situation of an extraordinary man. Whatever he does, he has the standpoint of the absolute, and he sees the highest and the broadest things imaginable. And I will put also the poems by Gao Shi and Cen Shen in the description to this video, so you can compare. I will not translate them, but you can at least compare with the original Chinese and see if you can find any of the power and breadth of vision of Du Fu in these other 2 minor poets, who are fine poets, I must say also. They are absolutely fine poets, but it's very instructive to look at the works of minor poets and compare them to a really great poet to really see the difference and feel the difference. And you should always listen to this difference. There's really no good reason to read poetry from 1,000 years ago, to 1,200 years ago, 2,000 years ago, or even 50 years ago, if it's not of the first class. There's so much first class stuff out there, and we really need to be aware of the distinction between the great stuff and the merely good. The merely good is not for the ages, it's not worth your time. So, thank you for listening, and bye.